It's time for Recipe of the Day. I know, it's mid-August and I'm making stew and that makes no sense to you, but it makes sense to me. It's because my kids went back to school last week because here in Florida, they go back to school sort of near the beginning to middle of August. And that's hot and summery here in Florida. But back to school, where I'm from in central Canada, that happens in September. And it's part of fall going back to school. And so something about school supplies, getting the kids ready for school, taking that first day of school picture in front of our front door. It's actually the last one that the two of them will be in because my son is a senior this year. But yeah, all of that has put me in this kind of fall mood and I am craving stew. So you are getting a pork stew recipe today. Yes, pork stew. You can make stew with pork and it is luscious and delicious. So I'm going to tell you what kind of pork to use and how to make this stew. We're going to dive into the recipe though. So you're going to preheat the oven to 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And then in a large bowl, you're mixing together a half cup of all-purpose flour, 3 teaspoons of salt, and a tablespoon of garlic powder. And then to that, you are adding your pork that's been cut into 1-inch cubes. What you want is a 2.5 pound boneless pork butt that you've cut up, or you can use pork shoulder, but it tends to not be sold boneless. So then you're trying to cut it off of the bone. Now, what I'm going to say is that pork butt usually comes in a larger size than 2.5 pounds. If you can't find a small one, you can ask your butcher to cut it in half for you. Even the butcher at the grocery store will sometimes do this kind of thing. Or you can get the whole larger pork butt and then cut it to the size you need and put the rest in the freezer for the next time you want stew. Or there are some alternate cuts that you can use. You can get some pork shoulder blade steaks. That is a similar area from the shoulder, so it's going to be the same kind of juicy meat, but it has bone in it. So you're just going to have to cut it off the bone as you're cutting it, and they tend to be thinner, so you're not going to get like 1-inch cubes. Maybe you can cut them into 1-inch pieces, but they're going to be thicker. You can also use boneless country style ribs. Those do contain some of the meat from the pork butt or shoulder. They also often contain some loin meat though, and I'm going to tell you in a moment why you don't want loin meat in there. So it's the case that if you use the country style ribs, some of the pork is going to be juicy like the pork butt and some of it's going to be drier like the pork loin. That is the risk you're taking. You can also sometimes see meat that's labeled pork for stew or stewing pork. You have to just ask somebody what kind of pork meat it is though. Sometimes somebody in the meat department will know. It is usually pork shoulder and pork butt pieces, which is going to be perfect, but sometimes it's the dreaded pork loin. No, I don't have anything against pork loin generally. Well, I guess maybe I do. It is drier, but you definitely don't want pork loin in stew, except I'm going to tell you how to do it if you are insisting in a moment. So that is the next moment. That's what we're doing now. You are insisting that you want to use pork loin, pork tenderloin, or pork loin chops. You can. They're just leaner. That's why we cook a pork loin roast to like 140, 145 degrees Fahrenheit. That's the safe temperature. And we take it out of the oven and we want it even ever so slightly pink in the middle. And that is because it dries out when it's cooked more. It's kind of like if you think of like a filet mignon, the beef steak, it's so nice and lean, but if you cook it too high, it's kind of mealy. It's just not good. Whereas if you have those like chuck steaks, the stuff you use for pot roast, that has all that marbling in it. You want to take it up to a higher temperature and get that nice juicy, like pulled consistency that you get in pot roast. That's what you want. You don't want that leaner meat. Okay, so that's okay. You want to use the pork loin instead of the pork butt roast, even though I've told you shouldn't use the pork loin. I'm going to tell you what to do. At this point, though, everything is the same. So at this point in the recipe, we mixed together the flour, salt, and garlic powder. We have cut our 2.5 pounds of pork into 1-inch pieces. And then you're tossing those cubes of pork with the flour, just getting it evenly coated. I'm going to tell you now, there's more flour than you need to coat the pork. We are going to be using it all. So at no point should you throw out any of this flour. There's more than you need right now, but you're going to need it later. Okay, you're getting a large Dutch oven or heavy-bottomed pot. pot and you heat it on medium high with 1.5 tablespoons of cooking oil. I usually use like a grapeseed oil, but whatever you want is fine. And then once that's shimmering hot, you're adding in half of your pork, shaking off any excess flour as you transfer it from the bowl into your pot. So you're shaking the flour into the bowl, transferring half of the pork into your pot, and you are cooking that until it's nice and brown underneath, and then you're stirring it and cooking it until it's brown all over. It's going to be about 5 minutes. Transfer that pork to a plate, add another 1.5 tablespoons of cooking oil to the pot, add the remainder of your pork, shaking it off into the bowl as you go as well, and just until that is nice and brown. It's going to be about 5 minutes. Once all your pork is transferred to a plate, set that aside, reduce the heat down to medium, and you are adding 3 ribs of celery that you've chopped up and 1 large onion chopped up. Cook and stir that occasionally over medium heat until it's softened. Then you're adding all that remaining seasoned flour into there. We didn't throw it out, remember? Sprinkle the flour over the onions and celery and give it a stir for a moment. And then you're going to stir in 6 cups of chicken stock or vegetable stock. And you're also adding in 5 medium carrots that you've peeled and cut into 1-inch pieces, 4 medium potatoes that you've peeled and cut into 1-inch pieces, and 2 tablespoons of tomato paste, 2 teaspoons of dried thyme leaves or 2 big sprigs of fresh thyme, 2 teaspoons of Worcestershire sauce. Now at this point, if you were using the pork butt or shoulder or the blade steaks or the country style ribs or pork stew meat that you know is butt or shoulder, you are adding that in now as well, along with any juices that accumulated on the plate. And you're going to increase the heat to medium high and cover the pot and bring it to a boil. Stir to make sure nothing is stuck to the bottom of the pot. And then you transfer it to the oven. Okay, but if you use the pork loin or tenderloin or pork loin chops instead, you do not add them in at this point. You can put them in the fridge, set them aside. We're going to put this whole thing into the oven until the potatoes and carrots are nice and fork tender. And that is when you're going to add your pork loin back in. In this way, you're going to be able to cook that stew with the pork loin in it just until the pork is only just cooked, gentle, and then take it out and serve. Okay, so if you're using the pork loin, you are going to cook your stew in the oven, partially covered at 300 degrees Fahrenheit until your potatoes and carrots are fork tender. Then you're going to add that pork loin meat in, stir it in, and then you're going to cook it just until cooked through. It's going to be about 15 to 20 minutes, and then you're taking it out of the oven. And well, I have another thing to say in a minute, but that's done cooking at this point. If you use the pork butt or shoulder or any of those other things I mentioned that are not loin, you do add those to the pot, stir that, and then that goes into the oven, partially covered, and cooks until the meat is fall apart tender and the potatoes and carrots are tender. It's going to be 1.5 to 2 hours. Okay, so now at this point, your pork is cooked, your veggies are cooked, no matter what kind of pork you used. You take that out of the oven, you stir it. If it looks great to you, give it a taste, see if it needs more salt and pepper. If, on the other hand, you would like your gravy thicker than it is, what you can do is you can mix together 2 tablespoons of cornstarch with 2 tablespoons of water until smooth, and then you're going to stir that into your pot, and then you set that over a medium heat and keep stirring until it comes to a simmer and thickens. Then you can taste that and add more salt and pepper if you would like there as well. That is your pork stew. The only other thing that I will say is you noticed that this stew had for its root vegetables, carrots and potatoes. If you wanted to use turnips, parsnips, sweet potatoes, other root vegetables, basically you want 6 to 7 cups of the 1-inch cubed vegetables. The carrots and potatoes, it comes to 6 to 7 cups of those. If you're going to use not those, but other things, or one of those, or a little bit less of these and some of the others, you want 6 to 7 cups in the end of whatever you're using. And that is pork stew for the fall, but now it is summer, but we're having it anyways. I will put the link to this recipe in the show notes for this podcast episode, or you can head to cookthestory.com/ROTD and get it there. Everything there is arranged by date, so it's helpful to know that today is August 19th of 2025. I'm Christine Pittman from cookthestory.com, thecookful.com, the all-new chicken cookbook, and from this podcast, Recipe of the Day. I hope you have a great day. Let's get cooking.